Well, hello there. Thanks for joining me. I am Dr. Jen, and I am so pleased you've joined me for today's show. Today, we're exploring the location-specific tenancy guidelines for Washington State. In all of my location-specific episodes, I have included a lot of hyperlinks to the state landlord-tenant law code, whatever is applicable. In this case, the Washington State Residential Landlord-Tenant Act. And in fact, I'm going to screen share so you can see it. So if you're watching this on YouTube at My Life as a Landlord, you will see we're screen sharing the Washington Residential Landlord-Tenant Act. Okay, let me say my spiel and then we'll go through this. Each of the location-specific podcasts is set up the exact same way, answering the same 4 questions. What are the basics of that area's tenancy laws? What are the nuances of this location? What is different and stands out? And then some guidance about abandoned items left behind by a tenant in Washington State, where to get help in your local area, also in Washington State. But I must tell you that there are more things than what I'm going to tell you today. This is not everything. This will just get you started and give you some guidance. There may be other things that your city, regional district, county, parish, whatever, things like registering your rental. Maybe you need to be licensed as a landlord. You won't know unless you dig more than what I'm going to tell you here. I've done a lot of digging, but this episode is not all inclusive. You must research further in your specific area, but today's episode will get you started. I also want to give a plug for today's sponsor, Aloha Capital Investments, LLC. If you want to know more about real estate investing, check out alohajv.com. That's Aloha Capital Investments, LLC, alohajv.com. Okay, let's get into it. Okay, so I've screen shared the basics of the Washington State Residential Landlord-Tenant Act. Just so you can see, there's always a law. The tenancy law is an actual law. Every place has that. It's a law. So what I've got on my screen right now is the law part. It's incredibly legalese. There's hyperlinks and PDFs and like all kinds of stuff that you can jump to everything. So like, for example, this one, landlord duties. Let me just click on this one so you can see what the landlord duties are supposed to say. It's super, super legalese. But there are always, I'm just scrolling down to the bottom, there are always ways. Somebody somewhere has made this way easier to digest. And that's what we're going to go through today. So if you want to read this, I've got the hyperlink in the description of however you're listening to the show or watching the show. I've got all of those hyperlinks in here as well. Yeah, this is really involved, which is good. But let's talk about this. So this is landlord-tenant. Some of these items I've got on the screen now is the Office of the Attorney General, Washington State, Attorney General Nick Brown, talking about tenancy items, landlord-tenant items. And so we've got a bunch of information about forms. This one is fee in lieu. Yeah, this is really interesting. Let's just jump right into this. Fee in lieu of security deposit. Basically, this is the only state I've seen this where you don't have to, if you're a landlord, you do not have to accept a security deposit if you don't want to. So let me just read the little spiel here that says it. And in 2022, the legislature adopted HB 2064. Under this law, a landlord may offer a tenant the option of paying a fee instead of a full security deposit. When a landlord offers the tenant a choice of paying a fee in lieu of the security deposit, the landlord must disclose certain terms to the tenant in writing. They must provide a disclosure form with any lease and renewal that includes the option to pay a fee instead of a security deposit. Very interesting that this is an option. The other thing that I've seen in the state is that you have an option to pay as a tenant. You can pay your security deposit in 3 installments if you'd like, which I don't know if this is an option or if it's a requirement. It looks like it's an option. So landlords may just say, you know what, I want security deposit. We're not doing this monthly payment. We're not doing installments. I just want the deposit and that's it. But if they want to help, they can. 14-day notice forms. This is another really interesting thing that is really interesting. Hang on. Let me just go through this. Pre-made forms. There is a notice form with wording. There's some pre-made forms and some sample letters. 14-day notice forms, which are basically the 14 days to pay or quit. And here we go. Let's see, printable document. This is pretty standard. You know, I've seen quite a few of these. Here it is, 14-day notice. So I've got this on the screen here. To the tenant, you just write the tenant's name and the tenant address. 14-day notice to pay rent or vacate the premises. And it says, you know, your monthly rent is past due for, you list all the months, utilities for the months, and then other periodic charges, recurring or periodic charges identified in the lease. This potentially could include a late fee, potentially. But it's important, you've got 14 days. Basically, they've got 14 days to pay or 28 days to get out, is what this form is. Interesting. Yeah, so 14-day notice forms, and then you can file a complaint right here. This is at the Office of the Attorney General. Now, I don't think they do specifically just housing stuff, but that's one option that you can do. Let me keep going. Oh, this is about abandonment. I've got a bunch of things in here about the resources, landlord-tenant resources. So this is also the Office of the Attorney General. Self-help brochure, your rights as a tenant in Washington. We can just go right into that. Northwest Justice Projects. There's quite a bit of help for tenants. We're going to go through how you get some help. But there is a, let's see where, contents, introduction. Oh, so it's a bunch of drop-down menus on how to do this. General information only, yeah. So this is all before moving in. Deposits and other fees. So screening fee, security deposit, damage deposit. There's a bunch. There's some that are refundable, not refundable. Screening fees, talks about a screening fee, talks about a security deposit. Do I have to pay a security deposit? Maybe not. And so this is the one monthly deposit waiver fee. So this is something that you can, this is maybe an option. This is what we were talking about initially, is the landlord maybe give you an option to pay a monthly fee instead of a security deposit, especially for low income tenants. Does the landlord have to give me back my security deposit? Yes, they do, but only what isn't used for repairs. And so this goes through some of this. Condition check-in list. This is the list of the condition inspection as you're moving in. So this one's called the condition check-in list. I've seen it called the inventory checklist, condition inspection. I've seen it called a number of things, but basically it's describes the condition and the cleanliness of the rental and existing damages at the time the tenancy starts. So the stuff that is, the landlord is saying, this is how it is going to be, this is how it is, or these are the items I'm going to repair, but this is not due to the tenants that are coming in. This is not due to them. Yeah. Can I pay the rent in cash? So these are all how-to items. Have I abandoned my place? This is about abandonment here. It's oh, here we go. Download printer friendly. Printer friendly. Perfect. That one's way easier to screen share. Okay, an overview. Here we go. I think I'm going to add that one in as well. So want to make sure that we've got this. Things like late fees, grace periods. There's an automatic 5-day grace period here in Washington State, which is unusual. And the late fee, you can charge a per day fee from the first of the month until paid, and but it's got to be paid if it's, wait a minute. You can charge a per day fee from the first of the month until the rent is paid, but they have up to the 5th to actually pay their rent. So if they pay on the 5th, you can't charge a late fee because it's not technically rent late. So that's interesting. Month to month, fixed term rental. Yeah. So Can the landlord put any rules they want to in an agreement? No, they cannot put anything, the landlord cannot put any rules into rental agreements. You can't, you can't do anything that's in bad faith. I mean, I can read all of these or you can read them yourself, but you want to make sure that you are being smart about this. But let's talk about where this is really going to get good as far as rent increases, especially if you're living in Seattle. If you're living in Seattle, Seattle landlords must give 180-day notice of a rent increase. There is no, I couldn't find a cap in the rent amount for the rent increase for the state, but in different cities and different counties, they may limit the amount of the rent increase. And it appears that everywhere other than Seattle, there is a 60-day notice if you're not on a fixed lease. So if you're like on a month to month, it's a 60-day notice. But if you have subsidized rent, then it's 30-day notice. And it's got to be written notice. And here's the other thing. Written notice in Washington state, emails and texts appear to be allowable in Washington state, but may not be allowed everywhere. That's interesting because if you're got to give written notice and you're sending them a text, sometimes texts, depending on where you are, texts may not be considered written notice, especially if you can block a text. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that's the right one, but let's see here. Damage deposit, we keep going here. Landlord went into foreclosure. Can I get my security deposit back? Maybe. Cleaning fees. This is last month's paid in rent in advance. Last month's rent paid in advance. Yeah, so this one, this is where it comes in saying this is not a deposit. The landlord can only use it for payment of your last month's rent, and the landlord cannot keep this amount for damages because it is not for damages, it is for rent. The landlord must refund this if you move out early at the landlord's request or if you, after you give proper notice. Can I pay rent in cash? What if I find damages later? All of this, again, it's really important that everybody communicates in writing all of this while you're living there. I'm just scrolling through some of this. This is tenants' responsibilities, landlord's responsibilities. This is pretty standard. I've looked at quite a few of these tenancies, and this is very, very normal. If the landlord sells the property, that does not automatically end a lease or a month-to-month agreement. If the landlord is selling a property and wants to move in, the new landlord wants to move in, then they must give you a 90-day notice. But there's other details about that. So there is some nuances about that. Can the landlord enter my unit? Of course, the answer is yes. You must give at least 2 days written notice. In Washington, it's 2 days. Elsewhere, it's different. But you've got to actually, you've got to communicate properly. You can't just go in, right? That's abusive access. What if my unit needs repairs? This is normal, where you've got to have a landlord, tenants communicating that it needs repairs. You got to write the landlord a letter or wait for the landlord to pick, write the landlord a letter, describe the problem and what needs fixing. Make sure you've got all your contact information, wait for the landlord to fix the problem. And there is actually other hyperlinks, tenants, if you need repairs, what do you do? The other thing you can do is I gave my landlord notice about repairs. The landlord did not start the repairs within the required time. What can I do? So there's 4 options for a tenant in Washington state. You can move out, you can go to court or mediation. You can hire someone yourself to make the repairs and subtract that off the rent. But of course, you better have good documentation if you're going to do that. And 4, you can make the repairs yourself. Yeah, so, and in this case, if it says right in bold, if you repair something badly, the landlord can hold you responsible. So you want to make sure you're doing it right. You're not just gonna, half-ass it, right? So, illegal actions by the landlords, including lockouts, utility shutoffs, taking your property, renting condemned property, retaliations against you. You want to make sure that you are prepared and you are protecting yourself. Retaliations, I always look, when I'm looking at landlord retaliation and how they define, the different locations define retaliatory actions, typically raising the rent, reducing services, increasing your obligations, or trying to evict you. That's pretty standard. But what I'm always looking at is the time. In Washington State, this is pretty quick. 90 days is what they're saying, is 90 days. Is if the landlord tries to do any of those items within 90 days, it appears that retaliatory. In other locations, the timeline is different. I'm not even going to say what those are, but they're different. Do I have to tell the landlord I am moving? Well, of course you do. If you have a lease, getting your deposit back, landlord has 30 days to give you, return your deposit or give you a written statement or documentation such as receipts or invoices. If there are itemized deductions, you want to make sure that you've got that. And there are other hyperlinks, landlord, letter to landlord to return a security deposit, do it yourself forms. There's other items in here that will help you do that. Evictions. There's all kinds of information about evictions. Can a landlord ask me to move out for no reason? Landlords must have a quote unquote good or legal reason for not renewing a rental agreement. Yeah. But a landlord can also evict someone for misbehaving or not paying rent, right? And of course, here you go to court. Do I have to go to court? If you must go to court, you should get a notice called order to show cause, writ of restitution. There's lots of legalese in this kind of stuff. Oh, let's talk about abandonment. Have I abandoned my place? It depends. If you have legally abandoned the place you are renting only if you owe rent and you have told the landlord by your actions or your words that you're moving out, this may mean you've stopped staying in the rental and moved most of your stuff out. In this situation, the landlord can remove any of your remaining belongings from the rental, and they must store your things in a reasonably safe place, mail you a notice saying that where they are storing and the date they will sell it. And so there's actually another hyperlink in here that says, my landlord locked me out. So, yeah, we want to make sure you're paying attention to that. I'm actually going to add this to the hyperlink. So if you want to see the document that I am looking at, I'm going to add that to the description here. And so you can take a look at it for yourself. But let me just make sure I've got everything that I've got anything. Nuances. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the retaliatory actions. Also, there's usually, it's pretty standard that there is some kind of way for a tenant who is in an unsafe situation to terminate the tenancy quickly and pretty much without notice, without retribution back to the tenant. In Washington State's case, it says gang-related activity, drug-related activity, criminal activity, or anything else imminently a hazard. The landlord can give notice to terminate the lease, but the tenant can also give notice to terminate in the event there is something unsafe like domestic violence or sexual assault, things like that. Also, one thing that was really good in here, upon death of a tenant, the sole occupant of the unit, it is very specific on what to do. Washington State is very good on what to do in the event of death of a tenant. So make sure you read up on that. Let's see, what else do we got on this one? Abandoned property we talked about. And one thing about abandoned property, there's always a dollar value of below the dollar amount. You don't have to worry about necessarily, you're still trying to get a hold of the tenant, do the best you can. But if it's less than, in this case, if it's less than $250, you must still provide written notice, but the waiting time is shorter, 7 days. If the tenant does not retrieve their property within the time frame, you may sell or dispose of it if it's less than $250. But you also need to prove how you got to that dollar amount, right? If it's over $250, you must store the items, notify the tenant in writing of your intent to dispose of them. And especially the notice must include where the belongings are and provide at least 45 days for the tenant to reclaim those items. In both cases, you can recover the tenant's storage costs. Yeah, very interesting how that abandoned items and the death of a tenant, very well done in Washington State, but also very specific, especially if you're living in Seattle. You want to be very cognizant of that. Where to get help in Washington State. If you are a landlord and you are trying to figure something out, there is a place you can go, Rental Housing Association of Washington. This is one option. Another option, so this website is rhawa.org. You can take a look at that. You can also become a member of this. Northwest Justice Project, which is housing help and also legal help, and it may be different in different counties. nwjustice.org, that's actually who made the document we were looking at, Northwest Justice Project. So nwjustice.org. In Washington State Landlord Help, you can call 211 on your phone and get some answers. And then some of the other options that we had looked at was Washington State Office of Attorney General, residential landlord-tenant resources. And I think we've covered everything. And so what we went through in this episode is location-specific podcasts. They're all set up the same way, including this one. So we went through some of the basics of the state of Washington, some of the nuances in this location, and some guidance on abandoned items left behind by a tenant, and a couple of options on where to get help. Now, this is the same format for every location-specific episode, so if you're interested in another geographic area, you know already what I'm going to talk about, just in a different location. One more time, this episode is not all-inclusive. You must research further in your specific area, including your county, regional district, parish, city, any other governing body that involves your rental location. But today's episode will get you started, which is good. And if you're listening to this podcast, chances are you either want to be or already are a landlord in Washington State. Things you can do to help yourself are, read the Washington State Residential Landlord-Tenant Act. And you can also check out your local meetup group in your city, county, parish, whatever. How do you find a meetup? You can jump on Ask. I'm sure there are national landlord Facebook groups, but there are also different Facebook groups for different locations. There may be Washington State, there may be one for Seattle. I guarantee you, if you Google something like landlord meetup Washington State, that something's going to pop up. You will be able to find something somewhere if you want to have an in-person location, in-person meeting with other landlords like yourself. So I hope that you enjoyed today's show all about Washington State. If you learned something today, could you pretty please give me a review on whatever platform you listen to this podcast on, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or maybe you listen to this at mylifeasalandlord.com. It doesn't matter where you listened, but your input does really help. Today, I'm recording this episode on a cruise ship. I am on Carnival Splendor, floating between Australia, and actually I'm looking out my window, looking at the mountains of New Zealand. Real estate takes you places. Where do you want real estate to take you? Join me in the next episode, now in the library, episode 127, about the tenancy way, episode 126, the tenancy ways in New York.